The shot missed. It was too low. The elk bolted through the brush down the mountain. Racon sighed to himself, knowing that it would take all day to haul the carcass back up the slope. He was planning to get back to Durango by sundown. Now it would be sunup if he was lucky. Slinging his rifle, he surveyed the path down. The slope was lightly covered in snow, great for tracking, but terrible for climbing. He reached into his bag and pulled out his canteen from between the two ragged-edged books. Taking a long drink, he shoved his canteen back in, tightened the straps, and adjusted his buckskin leather coat. "I guess I'll have to do this the hard way," he said, as he pulled his hatchet from the sheath on his belt and used it to help slow his descent down the hillside. It would dull up the blade something serious, but it was better than breaking his neck. Reaching the bottom of the ridge, he spotted the blood trail and followed it with his eye towards the frozen creek. Just behind a small fir tree, he could hear the buck's labored breathing. Must have nicked a lung, Racon thought to himself, and walked up to the beast, admired it for a moment. Then seeing it had just died, he began to process it for the long climb home. He almost didn't hear the sound of the truck's engine, but he looked up just as the engine turned off, making a horrible rattling noise. Slowly, he stood, sheathed his blade, and reached for his rifle. The three men sat side by side in the small pickup truck. The driver's mouth moved, and then after a moment, they all raised their right hand. The driver looked at all their hands as if to count them. Then they got out of the truck, three rifles pointed back at Racon. "No need for the rifles, strangers," Racon said in a flat tone. The three strangers split. Two moved to his right, and the third moved left, towards the cover of a fallen tree. "You are the stranger here, and according to the laws, you need to come with us. Weapon down," the driver said, and pumped his shotgun and raised the buttstock to his shoulder. Racon took a moment to look over his situation. The man on his left had found his kill shot while the other two advanced. Maybe he could get one, maybe not. He slowly placed his rifle on the bloody snow at his feet. "All right, I got no fight with you." The two advanced on Racon while the third covered them. They grabbed his rifle, bag, and relieved him of his hatchet and blade. The driver looked into the bag, pulling out the two books. "What are these, papers?" he said, as if he had never seen a Bible before. Racon kept silent as they escorted him at gunpoint to the bed of the little truck. In the back, they had a chain running down the middle with handcuffs attached to it, 10 in all. Racon was cuffed to the middle one and sat awkwardly on the low wheel well. The three men got back into the truck, and the rattling engine started hard. With a big jerk, they backed through the woods and started down a rough trail towards the east. It was sunup when the little truck turned down a paved road, now overblown with snow. Racon managed to sit with his back to the cab while he fought to keep his left hand from freezing. The truck stopped, and Racon heard the muffled voice of the driver. Then two of the three raised their hands, and the truck moved on. The truck stopped again after the sun had been up for about an hour. This time, all three men raised their hands. They exited the cab and stepped to the side of the road to relieve themselves. Racon stood as best he could and did the same over the side of the truck bed. He looked back west and saw he was far from his home in the valley of Durango. To the east, only rolling, empty fields could be seen. "Where are we headed?" Racon said as the three men got back in the truck. The engine started and they moved on. Sometime around noon, Racon woke from his cold nap. The truck had stopped and was parked in the middle of a small town. There was a hardware store, a bar, and some kind of jailhouse. The rest of the buildings seemed to be more residential or boarded up. 5 men walked out from the bar, and the 3 men got out of the truck. They removed Racon from his cuff and stood him behind the truck while they spoke just out of earshot. 6 of the 8 men raised their hands, and Racon was led into the jail, where he was put in a cell and given a strip of jerky from his own bag in his canteen. He slowly chewed on a big bite, savoring the juices while he strained to listen to what was being said outside. Strangers are against our laws. They upset the balance. Too many opportunities to tie or break a vote. I say we dispose of him, a gravelly-voiced man said. The next voice was one Racon recognized as the driver. But we ain't seen a stranger in almost 50 years. Shouldn't we find out where he's from? How many more there are of him? The gravelly-voiced one said, Vote on it. They must have voted on keeping him, because he was left unmolested for the next 24 hours or so. Racon had finished off the last of his water. Then the door to the jail swung open, and a woman with long, straight, dirty blonde hair walked in. She looked at him a moment and paused. Then, as if composing herself, she moved to his cell and handed him a warm cloth. 2 other young women stood outside the door. She said nothing, just nodded towards him that he should look inside. When he unwrapped the cloth, she found a freshly baked half loaf of bread and a brick of cheese about the size of his hand. He smiled at the woman, and she smiled back. Then she caught herself reacting and turned quickly to leave. I could use a refill on this too, please, Racon said as he held up his dry canteen. She came quickly and took the canteen. As fast as they appeared, the trio was gone. Racon looked at the door when the smell of bread caught his attention, and he tore off a small piece and ate it, and decided to take a look at his new home. The steel bars were solid. His cell had been maintained. The window was too high to reach and really served mainly as light since there didn't seem to be power. Maybe he heard a generator running the night before, but it could have been that loud little truck that brought him here. He had been locked up only once before, and like the last time, he would have to use his head to get out of this one. Around dark, the woman and her 2 friends returned with his canteen. She carried a battery-operated lantern and seemed to be in less of a hurry to leave. Racon got a better chance to look at her. She had light blue eyes and a straight nose with high cheeks. She seemed sturdy, but it was hard to tell because she was wrapped in a big fur blanket and he could only see her patched dark leather boots. Racon took a long drink of the cool water and smiled. Thank you, ma'am. She nodded and beckoned with her hand for the cloth she had delivered breakfast with. Racon picked up on the pantomime and handed it over. You can't talk, he said as he passed the cloth to her. She shook her head. No. Something the matter with your voice? No. Again. The other 2 women at the door were starting to get anxious. They started motioning with their hands for the woman to go. One of them rapped loudly on the door. The woman turned, and as she moved past the cell, handed a scrap of paper to Racon. The room went dark as the door closed. He sat there for a long time, in the dark, wondering what the note might say, or even if it was a note. Finally, after midnight, the clouds had cleared and the stars were bright enough for Racon to make it out. Written in almost childlike scrawl, it simply said, Help. The next day was uneventful, till late in the afternoon when a group of 5 men came into the jail. One was holding the ragged small book of the Constitution, and the other the Bible. Then the man with the gravelly voice said, Vote. 3 of the 4 raised their hands, and the gravelly-voiced fellows seemed to not like the results, and the group left in a hurry. What's going on with the voting in this town? Racon said to himself. That evening, after dark, the woman came back, this time alone. She brought no light and moved close to the bars. Speaking like she had not uttered a word in years, she stumbled out, Can you be willing to help? Racon nodded, but then spoke. I am willing to help. He emphasized the word, help. But I need to know how I can. He pointed at the cell. She thought for a moment. They vote against you tomorrow. It will tie. You vote for yourself. That's how you help start. Racon nodded at her. How can I vote? It rules. All in town can vote. When they do, you raise hand. You will get out. Some want this. She stopped at the sound of that truck starting up, then continued, "Help vote our voice back." She pointed at her mouth. The truck drove by the jail. The woman stood to leave. "What's your name?" Racon said. She smiled at him and slipped out into the dark. Racon looked down to see a fresh cloth and the smell of bread and cheese. He sat back in his cell and ate his dinner. Around late afternoon, the men returned. This time, it was the 5 men that voted last time, and the 3 men from the truck. 9 men in the room, counted himself. They looked at him for a moment. The gravelly-voiced one said, "Vote." 4 men to the left of the gravelly-voiced man raised their hands. The gravelly-voiced man looked at the 4, upset. "Tie again." "No. Look," the driver said. The gravelly-voiced man looked at the cell and saw Racon standing with his right hand up. "Who told you the law? Was it her?" Then he and the others on his side left, almost knocking the door of the jail from its hinges. The others smiled and opened Racon's jail cell. Their leader, a young kid no more than 20 or so, spoke. "You have been voted out, but not free. Carl will rally the others to vote with him to have you hanged." Racon shook their hands. "Why do you want me out?" "Simple. You can break the tie. You are free to walk around town, but if you try to leave, we will shoot you." And with that, they left. Racon was a bit puzzled. They voted him out of his jail, but not free. He was pretty sure he could easily get out of town before anyone had time to notice. He stepped outside and saw the little truck parked near the jail. His weapons and equipment sat unprotected in the front seat. He began to put them on as he watched the people in the town all take a good look at him. He saw the keys in the ignition. "Too easy," he said with a smile. After donning his gear, he walked up to the kid who had talked to him. "I don't want you to take offense, but there's no way in hell you can keep me here. I'm going home," Racon said with a big grin. "You can't," is all he said, and pointed to the tower at the end of town. Racon squinted and looked at the tower. He couldn't believe it. It was an XL-75 biosynth autocannon mounted to the top of the tower and was pointed straight at him. "So, that's why you took my canteen. You needed a sample of my DNA to sync to the gun." Now everywhere he went in town, that gun would be pointed right at his head. And if he stepped out of range, boom. It also has a proximity setting, so don't get too close. It shoots 1 warning shot. That's all, the kid added, as if knowing Racon's next thought. "How close?" "I don't know. It's over 100 years old," the kid smiled. Racon walked back towards the jail and sat on the front step. The buzzing motor of the gun as a reminder he was out of one prison and into a bigger one. The sounds of an argument and fighting focused his attention as Carl and his thug buddies yelled and cursed at the woman who gave Racon the note. He stood up, adjusted his belt and pack, shouldered his rifle, and calmly walked towards them. Carl hit the woman hard and she fell to the ground. The other 2 younger women and a few of the men went to her. Carl yelled out, "It was voted on!" They backed off and Carl kicked her. He must have been used to beating people without any threat because he didn't even see Racon step up next to him and throw the big haymaker punch. Carl hit the ground hard and everyone stopped. Racon was about to finish the job when the woman screamed, "Stop!" Everyone turned to look at her, some gasping at the sound of her voice. Then she said, "Let him. It was voted on. It's the law." Carl shook off the punch pretty quick and got up to stomp on the woman. Racon grabbed him. Then the kid pointed and just said, "Gun." Racon looked and saw the XL-75 was spinning up. He reluctantly let Carl go. Carl grabbed the woman and pulled her up to her feet and spit out, "And when I'm done, we will vote and do it again, because you spoke. Racon's voice boomed over everything. I want to vote to stop Carl. Everyone looked. The kid spoke up. You cannot. Once it is voted, it is the law. You cannot counter the law. Racon turned his head, thought for a moment, and said, Okay, I want to vote to let me beat Carl when he finishes beating her. Everyone looked at one another, and Carl looked at Racon. They wouldn't do that, Carl sputtered. Are you sure? Looking at some of the faces here, some of them would like to see you beat, Racon countered. Are you all ready to vote? Carl let go of the woman and motioned to his gang to follow, and they stomped off into the bar. The gun went back into sentry mode. Racon looked at the woman. She was tough. She shook it off as the streets cleared and walked away. Racon stood alone as the sun sank below the horizon. This is getting ugly, he said to himself. But before I can do anything about it, I need to get rid of the gun pointed at my head. He walked back to his cell at the jail as the XL-75 moved following his head. The night was cold, dark, and silent. The sounds of the engine from the little truck roared. Lights came on all down the street. The kid ran out to see Racon in the truck, the light of the gun blinking red. Don't do it, he shouted in warning. It'll kill you 20 yards out of town. But Racon wasn't headed out of town. The truck lurched backward as fast as the engine could. He was headed straight at the tower. He swung the driver's door open. The steering wheel was so loose it was hard to keep the truck aimed at the base of the tower. What did the kid say about a warning shot? Racon mused as a round from the XL-75 biosynth autocannon ripped through the roof of the truck and blasted off the rearview mirror. That's my cue. Racon leapt from the truck just before the cannon opened fire, and that little, loud truck smashed into the tower, toppling it and the gun with it. The XL-75 gave out one last buzzing sound before the round in its 100-year-old magazine exploded, ending Racon's prison term. The entire town was on the street now, staring at Racon as he got up, stretching his left arm, and dusted himself off. Carl and his thugs walked right up to him. Racon leveled his rifle at Carl's head. Not a good feeling, is it? He said as Carl and his thugs stopped cold. Now we can talk like gentlemen. Racon shouldered his rifle. I'm calling a vote to end the silence, Racon said loudly so everyone could hear. The kid moves towards Racon. You can't vote the law out. It doesn't work that way. I'm not calling a vote on that. I'm voting no one can be silent. Who's with me? Racon raised his hand. The kid looks around at the others, and Carl, then at Racon, and slowly raises his hand. Racon counts the votes. Well, looks like that's a majority. No one can be silent. So I think y'all better start speaking up. I don't plan on sticking around long, so if you want to fix it, you best speak now. I vote we kill the stranger, Carl yelled right at Racon. The people of the town started to yell at Carl, some of them for the first time in 20 years. It sounded like an army of banshees. Racon raised his hand. Wait. Wait. The only way out of this hell you got yourself into is to vote, even on this. They looked at one another and voted. Again, Racon cast the deciding vote. You can never kill me, Carl, Racon smiled. It seems you got a problem we call the tyranny of the majority. And my guess is someone died after that vote, and you've been stuck like this for quite some time. Racon reached into his bag and pulls out the 2 books. In his right hand, the Bible, and in the left, the Constitution of the United States of America. In my right hand, I hold the book that tells us how we should act towards one another. It tells us that God gives us all infinite value and that we should love one another as He loves us. In my left hand, this book tells us that we have the individual right to speak, protect ourselves, and be treated fairly, and that no one group is more important than any other. I call a vote that you read, consider the wisdom of both, and if found worthy, adopt them as your guide. Racon lowered his left arm, and keeping the right held high. Slowly, the hands began to raise. All but Carl and a couple of his close thugs voted in favor. Racon smiled. He walked over to the woman and handed her the books. That is the best I can do. The rest is up to you. She took the books and held them close, and for the first time in her life, she freely spoke.